The Chicago Bulls do the expected and extended qualifying offer to Patric Williams. Is it the right move? Is he still most likely to return to the Chicago Bulls? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, the King apparently offered a 13th overall pick for Alex Caruso, and the Bulls decided to go for Josh Giddey. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then lastly, the Kings are interested in Zach Lavine, but it's going to come at a hefty price. We're going to talk about all that and more on today's Locked On Bulls.
You are Locked On Bulls, your daily Chicago Bulls podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Bulls, member of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every single day. I'm Haize, host and creator of Chicago Bulls Central and Chicago Bears Central YouTube pages and podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get into it. So the Bulls did kind of the most expected move of the offseason, extending a qualifying offer to Patric Williams. This makes the most sense as a qualifying offer of $13 million. It allows the Chicago Bulls to keep Patric Williams as a restricted free agent, which is going to allow them to have a little bit more flexibility. They can negotiate with Patric Williams as they could have even if he was an unrestricted free agent, but it gives them the right to match any deal that he could get offered by another team if he signs an offer sheet. It doesn't mean that the Bulls will, but it does give them the right to. I believe now the period where it used to be like a week to match things like 3 days now, the teams have to make that decision on if they're going to match a restricted offer sheet that a restricted free agent gets. And the question that herein lies now is, what does this mean for the future of Pat? What is the value that the Chicago Bulls are looking at with Patric Williams? Very rarely does a player sign for less than their qualifying offer. It has happened in the history of the NBA. But for the nature of this conversation, let's just assume that Patric Williams is not going to sign for less than the $13 million qualifying offer. So, to me, I think that you can look at a deal for Patric Williams being anywhere between $16 to $18 million annually, maybe even a little bit less if the Bulls, can negotiate with his injuries and things like that. But you're probably looking at like a 3-year, $48 million deal, something like that for Patric Williams. And I think that that's fair. That allows, Patric Williams, he'll still be 25 years old, almost 26 when he goes back into free agency again, becoming an unrestricted free agent. It gives him 3 more years to really show, especially with the Bulls apparently headed in a younger direction with their roster. It gives them that ability to really show that it deserves an even larger contract and really develop his skills as well with maybe a younger core that kind of fits the way that he'd like to play a little bit more, possibly. Can't say that for sure. But, this also allows that if the Bulls are looking to retain Patric Williams, or if a team does, like, they can also sign and trade, much like they did with Lauri Markkanen a few years back when they sent him to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So it's a lot of different options. There are basically 4 different scenarios, not getting into like the weeds of different little micro things that can happen, is that either he takes the qualifying offer, he signs it, he plays on a 1-year deal at $13 million. He becomes an unrestricted free agent at the end of the next season. He can reach a longer-term extension with the Chicago Bulls. So that's the option. He can sign an offer sheet with another team, or it can be signed and traded. That's really the options you're looking at with Patric Williams here. And, Patric is a very polarizing topic for a lot of Chicago Bulls fans, right? You have your segment of Bulls fandom that looks at Patric Williams and they say, hey, this team went into a very different place the year after we drafted him. We brought in veterans. We went from a team that was young and apparently going to build through the draft, and we became a team that was going for it then with adding Lonzo Ball, Nikola Vucevic, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso. And that may have changed the trajectory of what Patric Williams' role on this team could have been without it. Then, of course, you have the other side of the fan base that looks at Patric Williams and says, you are a 4th overall pick. A 4th overall pick, and you have played now 4 years in your NBA career. 2 out of those years have been, shortened by injury. And so, for a 4th overall pick that has, for his career, averages 9.7 points per game on 46% shooting, 41% three-point shooter. So that is that. Only taking 2.8 for his career, but we know the last few years he's basically doubled it, 3.5 3-pointers per game the last 2 years. 4 rebounds, 1 assist, a little under a steal per game at 0.9, and almost a block per game over his career as well. Those aren't numbers that necessarily, for people that are stat sheet watchers, scream a player that has to stay around. But then you look at the other things. The fact that Patric Williams is still only 22 years old, turning 23 in August, but at some point, that only means so much, right? But he's also a player that maybe you look at with an increased role could do something. And me and Pat, the designer, my co-host here, we very well differ on how we view Patric Williams. But I don't think that it's not that I don't understand where Pat's coming from. For example, Pat is at the point where he's ready to give up on Patric Williams. I'm not there. I'm just not there yet. I think that, we've seen players develop late into the career. We just had it last season with Kobe White. But it's just that, Kobe had flashed some things before. Pat's flashed a little bit. I always go back to the month of December for Patric Williams. It was really a month where that was where Zach Lavine was out. This team was playing, a different style, playing much more faster. The ball was moving around. And in the month of December last year, Patric Williams averaged 14 points per game, 4 rebounds, basically 2 assists, basically a block, basically a steal per game on 52% shooting and 50% from three-point range, taking 3.8 per game. Now, that is one of the best months of Patric Williams' career. And when you look at that, it wasn't like it was inconsistent either. Out of the 12 or so games they played, maybe even more than that in December, he only had 5 games where he scored in single digits. Everything else was in double digits. He's being way more consistent, being a little bit more aggressive as well. Then the injury happened, and he never was quite the same after that. But still, that is me saying, even with, I like to talk about things from both sides. That's just 1 month that I could pull out of that. Now, it was a really good month, and the Bulls were winning a lot in that month as well, only having 5 losses in the month of December. But it's still, you still got to look at that and question, all right, is that enough? And ultimately, I think it comes down to this for me, is that if the Bulls are going younger and they are planning maybe to be bad for a little while, and maybe not necessarily tank, right, to be bad, but to be in a place where development is the focus of the young guys that they have on this roster, you want to keep Patric Williams around. As long as he wants to stay here, he's not going to cause any fuss. We haven't heard anything like that as far as being any type of distraction in the locker room. Patric is not somebody that I'm ready to just give up on, but I can understand the Bulls fans that are. I can understand it. We have been a franchise that, we've been starved for true talent for so long that, I understand it. But like I said, I'm a little bit more patient when it comes to young guys, right? Even, Josh Giddey and people calling him trash. I'm like, he's 21 years old. Dalen Terry, when they were ready to call him a bust after his first season, I'm like, hey, calm down, let's chill, right? So I'm just naturally kind of more inclined to be somebody who likes to give players a lot of time, right? Especially when it's not really until about 24, 25 where I'm kind of just like, they're probably who they are. But the question is how do the Bulls view him? And AK, I think, is still very high on Patric Williams. I do think that with this draft being some really quality wings in this draft, though, that if AK feels like he can make a move where it is another sign and trade, like in the Lauri Markkanen situation, that maybe they do look to move on from Patric Williams and get a different wing in this draft. Now, I hope that the Bulls go big in this draft. Khalil Ware is my guy. I doubt that the Bulls are going to draft him, but he's the guy that I would love to see the Chicago Bulls draft. I just think the Patric Williams situation is going to be one to watch this offseason because it can not be interesting at all in the fact that him and the Bulls negotiate, they come to a deal, they keep it pushing. Or it can get interesting where maybe him and the Bulls negotiate the first week of free agency and Patrick doesn't hear something that he likes and he goes out and starts taking meetings with other teams, a la what Zach Lavine did when he was a restricted free agent. And wildly enough, the Kings signed him to an offer sheet that he was on that was actually a pretty decent contract for the Bulls over that time, which I guess now they're paying for with the contract he's on now. But so those are the things to look at. And, ultimately, like I said, I'm not somebody who's ready to talk crap about Patric Williams or anything like that. I'm also not somebody who, if the Bulls were to make a decision to go a talented wing in this draft, a Mattis Bucilis, a Terrence Shannon Jr., and they look at that and say, hey, Julian, we think he's up at power forward. Let's go ahead and move on from P. Will. If they did that, it depends on the move, right? I wouldn't be mad at it. I would understand it both ways. So we'll ultimately see what the Bulls and how the Bulls do view Patric Williams, and if they can get a long-term deal done. But with that said, next up, we're going to be talking about the Kings apparently offered the 13th overall pick for Alex Caruso, but the Bulls turned it down in favor of Josh Giddey. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means. But before we get into that, we got to get into a message from one of our sponsors, and this is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items, exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, Bulls fans. So with that said, man, get into this next topic. And you always hear about things after the fact, right? It's always after the fact, and it makes you question things. And I know there are going to be a lot of people who have questions after this came out. Is that the Kings apparently felt that they were close to an Alex Caruso trade, that they offered the 13th pick in the 2024 draft to get Alex Caruso there. And so, this one comes from Sam Amick. So take that for what you will on how you view that. But he says this: they were close to a trade for defensive ace Alex Caruso last week, according to league sources, offering the number 13th pick to Chicago as the key chip. The Bulls, to surprise of many within the league, instead opted to send Caruso to Oklahoma City for Josh Giddey. And I know the moment that I read that, the absolute moment that I read that, I knew that a lot of Bulls fans were going to be up in arms because they value the draft pick over Josh Giddey. And of two minds with this, right? And what this tells me, and not to say that I agree, I really, I don't feel any type of way about it, to be honest with you. My own personal opinions, to get that out the way first, I think that Josh Giddey is still he would have been one of the best players in this draft. Top 5 at minimum in this draft. And I also think that, the Bulls, that's my thought process. It's my feelings on it, right? But I think that the Bulls had to, what this tells me is that the Chicago Bulls looked at the 13th overall pick. They looked at Josh Giddey, and they felt that Josh Giddey was probably the better option there. Now, there's also a chance that they could have looked at Josh Giddey as an expiring contract and said, hey, we can get this money off the books if he doesn't work. But when you have the opportunity to get a player that would have been on a 4-year rookie scale deal at number 13, and instead you trade for a 21-year-old player that's still younger than a lot of the rookies that are coming in this draft. For example, Terrence Shannon Jr. is 23, one of my best favorite prospects in this draft. But when they looked at Josh Giddey and they said, even though he's expiring, he goes into restricted free agency next year, we could have to pay him as soon as next year. We think that talent is better than what we're probably going to be able to get at number 13. That's the way that I read the tea leaves. I would love to hear from you guys on how you view, or how this makes you feel on hearing that the Bulls took the Josh Giddey over a number 13 pick. But that's just what it tells me, is that they looked at probably what they could get at number 13, who could fall at number 13. And even though there's some really good prospects here that could be around number 13, in my opinion, right? That could have gotten you, for example, you could have gotten Khalil Ware probably, and maybe Terrence Shannon Jr., or Khalil Ware and Tristan Da Silva, or Tajon Saloon and whoever, right? So there's a lot of players that could have been gotten there at 13 that I like their ceiling, but I think that the Bulls looked at what Josh Giddey is, and they said, no, that's what we want to bet on. That's what we want to bet on. And hey, I hope that it works out, is all I can say. If this does end up working out and Josh Giddey turns into who the Bulls apparently hope that he's going to turn into, we'll see. And I'm only bringing this up for contextualizing, right? That's it. Josh Giddey in 32 games without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, so not a huge sample size, averages 16.9 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 7.3 assists. I'm telling you right now, mark my words, If Josh Giddey averages that this year, which I'm not saying that he will, but if he averages 17, 8, and 7 this year with the Chicago Bulls, he's getting a $20 million contract extension as he's a restricted free agent from the Chicago Bulls. I tell you that right now. And so the Bulls looked at that and maybe said, hey, when he's not playing with somebody of the gravity of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, there's a pretty solid player there in Josh Giddey, and we're going to bet on that potential. And we'll see if it ends up paying off for the Chicago Bulls. Like I said, I can see it going either way. Josh Giddey is not as bad as some people make him out to be. He's also not this home run prospect that you look at and say he's for sure going to maximize on all the potential there's still potential in him. And I get it that people use the playoffs and the fact that he was unplayable in the playoffs and things like that. And I get it. I understand it. But at 21 years old, much like I said with Patric Williams and some of the other players, I'm personally not ready to just make a decision in saying that Josh Giddey is just going to be that type of player that's unplayable in the playoffs for the rest of his career. I have some big questions on with how this Bulls roster looks right now, how it's all going to fit together. But ultimately, I get the play on looking at the upside of Josh Giddey and selling yourself on that. And the question is, right, when it comes down to it, is that AK, because of the moves that he's either haven't made, or the ones that didn't work out, Bulls fans aren't going to give the benefit of the doubt of the Bulls being able to develop Josh Giddey. Now, Peter Patton, one of the renowned shooting coaches in the NBA, I don't know if he ever turns like Josh Giddey into like a knockdown three-point shooter, but maybe he can work. Now, they also have the guy who I think Peter Patton worked under. They're also an OKC Thunder, the OKC Thunder. So, that's something as well to kind of take away from that point. But when you hear that the 13th overall pick was offered, that, like I said, just tells me the Bulls weighed, hopefully, if they're smart, which I know people have doubt on, but if they're smart, they looked at the 13th overall pick and the talent they can get there, and they looked at Josh Giddey, and they made the decision that Josh Giddey was the play for them. For whatever the reason is, Josh Giddey was the play. That's the one that they're betting on, and hopefully that it works out, right? Because I'll say this, if Josh Giddey does pan out, if those numbers without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is something that the Bulls do get out of Josh Giddey, it's kind of worth it. It just is. Now, you still got to ask yourself how the fit with Kobe White. I know people who said, well, you're demoting Io. I don't look at it that way. Personally, I think that Io DeSumo is going to be the lead guard off the bench if he does not start. And he's still going to play almost 30 minutes per game, especially now with Alex Caruso gone. Io DeSumo stepping in to that role. And so, it's going to be plenty of minutes to go around unless Zach Lavine comes back. If you have a roster of Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Io DeSumo, Zach Lavine, DeMar DeRozan as 5 of your roster, also throw in Vooch, that spacing is going to be tough to come by. And that's I don't envy the position that the Bulls have so far put themselves in. We could see a lot of change come on draft night for the Chicago Bulls, but as it stands right now, we just don't know, right? And we just can go off of what we have to look at so far. The Bulls are apparently having trouble trading Zach Lavine, which we'll talk about here in a second. But overall, hearing that the Bulls turned down the 13th overall pick, and then when you pair in that they turned down a pick that became a top 10 pick, Bulls fans are going to riot. But I think that you also, with the top 10 pick, is that you have to look at it. That pick probably wouldn't have been in the top 10 if that team would have traded for Alex Caruso at the trade deadline. He would have made that team better, so probably wouldn't have been top 10. This 13th overall pick, though, is different because you know where that pick's going, and it's going to be some thoughts on that. Like I said, I'm neither here nor there on it. I do have prospects that I think if the Bulls would have picked at 11, and not even necessarily picking at 11 and 13, that maybe is your ability to trade up. If the Bulls did want to trade up in this draft to go after whoever that they have at the top of their board, having 11 and 13 could have gotten that done. The Bulls now looking to move on from Zach Lavine. Having the 13th pick could have incentivized to get that done. So, that's just some things that you got to look at when it all comes down to it. But the woulda, coulda, shoulda, you guys know I really don't do too much of that. I like to review things and talk about the possible options, but the Bulls have now picked this path. This is the path that Bulls fans that we're on as a franchise, and we just got to hope that it ends up being the right decision. But that's my thoughts on that. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Kings asking for more compensation back if they're taking Zach Lavine in a trade. We're going to talk about it all, but first, all right, Bulls fans. So I got a message from one of our sponsors, and that is FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost of bonuses. Daily, that's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and start making the most out of you. Hope you guys are making the most out of your summer. This is going to be a fun summer for Bulls fans. So make sure you guys are making the most out of it as well with FanDuel. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Bulls fans. So before we get out of here for today, one last topic on the docket today, and that is the Sacramento Kings are interested in Zach Lavine. Now, we've heard that, the Philadelphia 76ers are out. We've heard some other teams are out on Zach Lavine, but apparently this one, according to The Athletic, is that the Kings are interested in pursuing a Zach Lavine trade. And it would even say that the contract is probably the only thing that's stopping them from heavily pursuing. But the thing that is in all of this is that they would need to be incentivized to add a trade. And so when you look at this, Zach Lavine has 3 years, $215 million left on his contract. And so it's a huge one. And so while the Kings need to be incentivized, right? Sam Amick saying that there's some level of interest in acquiring Zach Lavine. But you hear that they need to be what is the incentivized that you needed? Like, is it a pick? Do you want the Portland pick? If it's the Portland pick, you can have the Portland pick. It's probably going to be 2 seconds. But to me, what this says, and this may be a little bit of Petty Roosevelt leaking out here in Locked On Bulls, it may just be the fact that the Kings saw what the Bulls gave up to get Josh Giddey here, right? The fact that what they took back for Alex Caruso is the better way to word it. Do the Kings now feel like maybe the Bulls operating from a place of weakness would be more susceptible to give them up a little bit more in the deal? The Kings can match the contract of Zach Lavine easier. Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter gets you there. Matching the numbers isn't the problem for the Sacramento Kings. The biggest question is that enough, right? And are the Bulls looking to get picks? Are the Kings then counter offering and say, hey, no, this deal it's 40-something million. No, you give us a pick, right? Is this just part of the normal negotiating tactics there? Or is there something more underlying here? Hearing that the Kings were ready to give up the 13th overall for Alex Caruso, is it maybe some pettiness because they were spurned in that deal? Make no mistake about it. There are a lot of NBA GMs that are petty. Make no mistake about it. If you think that there aren't some GMs in the NBA that are petty, you're being naive at that point. There are absolutely some petty GMs in the NBA, and I would not be surprised if some of that pettiness is coming out because of the Alex Caruso move. Now, even if you don't think that pettiness is a part of it, I do think that you're looking at the Bulls, if you're a good GM, and you're saying, hey, this team is struggling to find the Zach Lavine trade. They do not want Zach Lavine on the roster to start the season. Let's see what we can get back. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it, because if the Bulls play poker with them and have their poker face and like, no, we'll take Kevin Huerter, we'll take Harrison Barnes. You can give us a super heavily protected first round pick, or you can get us a couple of seconds and we'll get this job done. I like it's either way, it's going to end up being, in my opinion, that if the Kings end up being the trade partner for Zach Lavine, I don't think the Bulls are going to give up any compensation. That's kind of against what it seems like the direction the Bulls are going. They want to maintain and add values to their picks. So I don't see it. It's not like the Bulls are getting something back. Like Harrison Barnes is expiring. Kevin Huerter is a solid player, but he took a step back last season. Like, yeah, Zach Lavine was hurt. Zach Lavine has questions around him. Zach Lavine has the huge contract, but let's not act like you're sending us amazing pieces back. You're sending us solid pieces back. And I like Kevin Huerter. So, that's what it comes down to. This Zach Lavine trade saga, in a lot of ways, I'm just ready for it to be over. I don't know about you guys, and this isn't even saying that I'm just ready for Zach to leave, come hell or high water or anything like that. I'm just ready for this stuff to be over. That's it. That's where I sit right now. Is let's just get it over with. Let's get it done. If that's what you're gonna do, not to say I'm not saying take a bad deal, but find the best deal that you can get it done, and then let's start moving forward in a new direction that we've already started now with the Alex Caruso trade. That's my personal opinion. You guys can let me know what you guys think down below on that one. As always, that's my time for today. Make sure you guys are following us at Locked On Bulls. You can follow me personally at CEO Haize. Locked On Bulls is free and available on every podcasting app and platform of your choice, as well as YouTube. For Pat the Designer, even though he's not here, this has been Locked On Bulls, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace, y'all.